Welcome back to The Ripple Effect. Today, we are unpacking the Ukraine's deal with America. Is this an economic lifeline or a strategic risk? It's been 3 years the Ukraine has been fighting for its survival on the battlefield and at the negotiation table. But according to Donald Trump, Zelensky has been negotiating with no cards and has little to show for it. So there's a new deal at the table, but not for weapons, not for security, but for minerals. This week, Trump and Zelensky are set to sign an agreement granting the U.S. access to the Ukraine's vast reserves of lithium, rare earth elements, and other critical minerals. Trump calls it a victory for America, but what does this really mean for the Ukraine? I'm joined today with my co-host, Nicholaus Rohleder, and we are going to take a look at what's really happening, what's missing from the deal, and why this agreement could reshape geopolitics.
There's obviously there's a lot to digest here, but I think to start, we really got to focus on, what is the crux of this deal, and why exactly is the Trump administration posturing in this manner in addressing the end of this conflict? And I think that one, and just taking the point of the crux of this is they're viewing American, European, and Ukrainian economic interdependence and intertwining as a pathway to superior incentive alignment in a defense related matter going forward. And so, what he has done, and this is typical Trump negotiating here, is come up with an opening bid that the 500 billion of the investment will be, well, 500 billion of investment. That number is disputed. Some people say it's 100, some people say it's 200, but roughly 500 billion is to be repatriated to the U.S. In the form of this 50-50 joint venture, where it's co-funded by the U.S., partially by the Europeans, and by the Ukrainians with their state-owned enterprises that were established after the fall of the Soviet Union. And so I think that the core of this is, look, like 50-50 joint venture. A caveat for the Europeans: the United States pulls out 500 billion. He's thrown out 100 billion for the Europeans, and then Ukraine will get the balance. And I think that the challenge here is that from a Ukrainian perspective, there's not a lot of options on the table, and Trump is really dictating the circumstances here. The downside here is quite severe in the sense of they're beholden to another country to exploit their natural resources and generate wealth from it over the medium to long term. But however, the opposite side is that if this is not conducted in this manner per the current posturing, that Russia will continue to advance and have control of these valuable natural resources, which are really the cornerstone of Ukraine returning to a functioning society and returning to a functioning economy as well, and really conducting a proper restructuring. So I think that's what's behind this, and really the crux of this deal. It might be good to perhaps dive into what minerals do they have and why that is important as well.
Well, and I think two parts to that. Not just the need for critical minerals for AI and defense and a lot of different industries, but Soviet Union's already taken over a number of the lithium mines. Is that correct?
So in Russia and recouping some of the, so the goal here is very clear, is to reestablish Soviet lines, right? And I think Putin's made that very clear, and the idea here is to get to a structure of economic interdependence and having American economic interests on the ground that translate into security interests in the event of threat or conflict. And I think that if you have a look at Ukraine as it is right now, what they've been able to hold on to and what they've ceded to Russia in its advances. Ukraine has titanium, lithium, graphite, uranium, and a series of other the critical and strategic mineral deposits. And I think that if you have a look at, there's been a lot of things in the news around what is going to be the focus day one of this agreement, how economically recoverable are some of these resources. I think that if you look at the reality of this, Trump is touting rare earths, which I didn't mention prior, which are an important part of this ecosystem. But in reality, Ukraine prior to the war was 7% of global titanium production, which is very important in aerospace and defense. I could see that being a major focus of this for self-sufficiency for the United States. And similarly, from both an American and a European perspective, the lithium deposit there is of interest. I think that what has not been looked into to the degree that it is necessary to discern the ultimate economic value here is the recoverability of these resources relative to their economic value. And I think that that is something that we'll see in the coming years, months. But this is a very, very long term intertwinement that is being put into place, just given the fact that it takes 10, 15 years to bring one of these deposits into production. And so I think that really the issue here is that on the rare earth side specifically, and for lithium and some of the other areas, that part of Ukraine is the part that broadly Russia controls, and we haven't had hard lines being taken yet on what territorial concessions Ukraine will make, but it's highly likely that a lot of that will remain in Russian hands.
To the ripple effect, what does this look like for, economic rebuilding? And also, I think one of the big pieces that wasn't captured in the deal was security. It's not an exchange. We'll take your minerals and split them and you'll get security. They're really relying on Europe to provide that security and knitting Europe into the deal. What does a ripple effect look like for those parts and pieces of this discussion?
Well, this is a very strategic way, and given my Donald Trump's a negotiator, so it's like his opening hand here is, let's get our money back that we've put in, as the U.S. This is in Europe's backyard. They need to defend this. And then there should be, due to the fact that there's economic interdependence there, assuming that the appropriate amount of American investment comes into Ukraine to develop some of these resources, that there'll be an understanding there that there's some kind of mutual security relationship that's not explicitly defined in this document that he's putting forth. And so there's a lot of problems and ambiguity there, which obviously is making the Ukrainians very, very nervous. And it's a very strategic way for Donald Trump to pressure defense spending on the continent, to get some of the aims that he's already trying to achieve in the push to get everyone up to 5% in NATO. And then taking that red line again, that NATO broadly will not accept Ukraine as a member. It's one of Russia's red lines. Take that hard line and get this defense spending up as a deterrent mechanism. However, I think that the ripple effect here that I think we've got to focus in on, that no one's really discussing, is this is all is contingent on there being significant investment in a jurisdiction that's effectively been destroyed. And you look at some of these countries in the Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, and you think about why have they had roadblocks to their development, and a lot of it has been due to the fact that there are still significant economic interlinkages with Russia as a legacy from the Soviet days, and a lot of that has deterred American, European, and other foreign countries from making significant investments within these territories. I think that if you look back to before the war, and you look at Ukraine as a jurisdiction, it's actually a quite educated population, wonderful people, but that there is, quite until recently, there's quite a bit of graft. It is a jurisdiction in which you do need to have a partner on the ground that knows precisely who to speak to, how to get things done, how to navigate the regional processes and politics and matters such as that. And so I think that, what would be the foundation of this, I think that given Trump's posturing, is about as good as it's going to get, given where the world is today and the position of power the U.S. is relative to Europe, and they're putting forth this negotiation. But I think that really, the ongoing circumstances here are highly tied to formation and transportation of private capital into this country, and that's not going to be easy, right? I think that if, from a U.S. perspective and a European perspective, having some kind of shared vision as to how that is going to be conducted is probably the most important thing here. Because you go back to this post the Second World War, and you think about reconstruction of Europe, that was done within extremely tight and well-developed frameworks that were then implemented, adhering to a very specific and detailed plan that went on for a long period of time. And this is not going to be a 2-year reconstruction, right? And so I think what I'm really watching here is how does investment flow into Ukraine, presuming that there's some kind of American and European security veil over the territory that's left and the critical mineral deposits.
Right. And I think, above and beyond the infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt, there's also the question about, will the Ukraine actually have control over how and where these resources are extracted? Or are they just giving up, the opportunity for the US to extract what they want, when they want, where they want, and how they want? Because there's also the, environmental impact, depending on how minerals are extracted. So there's a lot, I mean, and I appreciate it's the first draft of a deal, but there's a lot at stake long term for the Ukraine making this concession, or this agreement, maybe we should say.
There's a back to the future element here, in the sense of during the colonial era of mining, this was how the bad working conditions, the lack of permitting, lack of environmental pollution infrastructure were exported to the developing nations, where the finished, the raw material was then exported back to whatever the parent country was, right? And I think that you haven't seen. It's been a long time since an international conflict like this was settled with the mineral expropriation to call it what it is, right? To recoup investment. And that really reminiscent of kind of the great powers negotiation going back 100 years or so. I think that that the challenge that we have here is we have Russia with imperial ambitions, we have China with imperial ambitions, we have the U.S. with the you could characterize as imperial ambitions. And this is going to set the precedent for how these conflicts and circumstances are settled. And I really think looking forward, you're going to see people approach the negotiating table for some of these matters in a wholly different manner than which was conducted in years and conflicts prior. And I think we'd watch in the coming weeks to see how that manifests itself in other parts of the world and take it week by week.
Absolutely. And beyond the Ukraine, do you think other countries are potentially going to receive similar type of offers? We've talked about Greenland, we've picked up the 51st state. Is this potentially a shift in how U.S. foreign policy addresses opportunity in and around the global competition for critical minerals?
Yeah, I would be extremely nervous if so just thinking globally and how this is going to be conducted. The U.S. has made it very clear that this is their negotiating posture, and this is happening with critical infrastructure and natural resource endowments now in Ukraine, Greenland, the Panama Canal. There's no telling, in the event of a U.S. Or a Taiwan-China conflict, what sort of the deal is there to be made there. And so I think that the concern broadly here is that what do you do if you're a smaller middle power, right? In the wake of this, because I think that in years past when this type of activity was occurring prior, and it was in a multipolar world, Europe was in a much different position than it is now, and had, I think, a much more robust seat at the table. And right now, you've really just got the U.S., Russia, and China, and I think the lack of European unity on this matter is really handicapping their ability to respond. And it's interesting, despite being kind of the founders of imperialism. And so I really don't know where this is going to take us from here. But I would suspect that in any spat with the Trump administration, the request on the other end is going to be some sort of favorable circumstances that lead to establishing this goal of U.S. self-sufficiency.
Nicholas, thank you. I guess, is this the future of international diplomacy, where access to natural resources replaces military support? And if so, long term, who wins and who loses? What do you think? Did the Ukraine get a fair deal, or did they give away too much? Let us know. Love to hear your comments on the ripple effect.